Fictional Royal Drama Story, Part 1. The golden autumn sun cast long shadows across the manicured gardens of Grandview Palace as Queen Isabella prepared for what should have been a routine morning audience. At 72, she had weathered countless storms during her 40-year reign over the Kingdom of Valoria, but nothing could have prepared her for the events that would unfold on this seemingly ordinary Tuesday morning. Lady Catherine Blackwood, the Queen's daughter-in-law and wife to Crown Prince Alexander, had been acting strangely for weeks. Palace staff whispered in hushed tones about her increasingly erratic behavior during formal dinners, her sharp words to visiting dignitaries, and her growing resentment toward the royal protocols that had once seemed second nature to her. The trouble began during the weekly royal council meeting in the Grand Chamber. Queen Isabella sat at the head of the ornate mahogany table, reviewing agricultural reports from the northern provinces, when Lady Catherine burst through the heavy oak doors without announcement. Her usually pristine appearance was disheveled, her designer suit wrinkled, and her carefully styled blonde hair fell loosely around her shoulders. "Your Majesty," she said, her voice carrying an edge that made several council members shift uncomfortably in their seats. "We need to discuss the ridiculous restrictions you've placed on my charitable foundation work." The Queen looked up from her papers, her piercing blue eyes meeting Catherine's defiant gaze. Years of diplomatic training had taught Isabella to remain calm in tense situations, but she could sense the electricity in the air. Lord Chancellor Winston, seated to her right, cleared his throat nervously while other council members exchanged worried glances. "Lady Catherine," the Queen replied with measured composure, "this is neither the time nor the proper venue for such discussions. Please schedule an appointment through the appropriate channels." But Catherine was beyond listening to royal protocol. The frustrations that had been building inside her for months suddenly erupted like a volcano. She slammed her leather portfolio onto the polished table, causing several teacups to rattle in their saucers. "Appropriate channels?" She laughed bitterly. "Do you have any idea how exhausting it is to navigate your endless bureaucracy, just to help children in need? Every initiative I propose gets buried under mountains of paperwork and committee reviews that take months to approve." The Queen's expression remained neutral, but those who knew her well could detect the slight tightening around her eyes. She had dealt with family disputes before, but never such a public outburst in front of the royal council. The ancient traditions of the monarchy demanded respect and decorum, especially in formal settings. "Catherine, you are clearly upset," Queen Isabella said, rising slowly from her chair. "Perhaps we should continue this conversation in private." "Private?" Catherine's voice rose to near shouting levels. "Everything in this palace is private, hidden behind closed doors while real people suffer because your outdated systems move at the speed of glaciers." Lord Chancellor Winston attempted to intervene. "Lady Catherine, perhaps if you would allow me to review the specific concerns you have with the approval process." "Stay out of this, Winston," Catherine snapped, whirling to face the elderly statesman. "You're part of the problem with your endless committees and reviews that accomplish nothing but maintaining the status quo." The Queen's patience was wearing thin. She had always prided herself on running a modern monarchy that balanced tradition with progress, but Catherine's behavior was crossing lines that simply could not be ignored. The other council members sat frozen, unsure whether to leave or remain as witnesses to this unprecedented family drama. "Catherine Elizabeth Blackwood," the Queen said, using her full formal name in a tone that would have made seasoned diplomats tremble. "You will lower your voice and conduct yourself with the dignity befitting your position, or you will remove yourself from this chamber immediately." Instead of backing down, Catherine seemed to grow more agitated. Her face flushed red as she pointed an accusatory finger at the Queen. "My position? You mean the position where I smile prettily and cut ribbons while real issues get ignored? Where I have to beg permission to spend money from my own charitable foundation?" The tension in the room was becoming unbearable. Senior palace guards, trained to protect the royal family from external threats, found themselves in the unprecedented position of witnessing an internal family conflict that was spiraling out of control. Captain Marcus Sterling, head of royal security, exchanged concerned glances with his lieutenant through the chamber's tall windows. Queen Isabella had endured enough. Drawing upon decades of experience handling difficult situations, she decided to end the confrontation before it could escalate further. "This meeting is adjourned," she announced firmly to the council members. "Please leave us." As the council members filed out quickly, grateful to escape the uncomfortable situation, Catherine continued her tirade. The walls of Grandview Palace had witnessed many historical moments, but this family confrontation was unlike anything in the kingdom's long and storied past. The stage was set for events that would shake the very foundations of the Valorian monarchy and change the royal family forever. Outside the chamber, palace staff could hear raised voices echoing through the corridors, and everyone knew that this was only the beginning of what would become the most dramatic day in recent royal history. Fictional royal drama story, Part 2. With the council members gone, the Grand Chamber felt even more imposing as Queen Isabella faced her daughter-in-law alone. The afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows created colorful patterns on the floor, but the beauty of the surroundings contrasted sharply with the ugly confrontation unfolding within the historic walls. Catherine paced back and forth like a caged animal, her heels clicking against the marble floor with each agitated step. Years of suppressed frustrations poured out in a torrent of accusations and complaints that she had been rehearsing in her mind for months. "Do you want to know what really bothers me, Isabella?" Catherine said, abandoning all pretense of formal address. "It's not just the bureaucracy or the endless protocols. It's the way you've systematically undermined every meaningful project I've tried to launch since marrying into this family." The Queen remained standing behind her chair, using it as a barrier between herself and Catherine's increasingly aggressive demeanor. In all her years of ruling, she had faced angry politicians, hostile foreign dignitaries, and even assassination attempts. But dealing with family drama required an entirely different set of skills. "Catherine, you're clearly experiencing some personal difficulties," Queen Isabella said, her voice maintaining its royal composure despite the circumstances. "Perhaps you should speak with Dr. Richardson about managing the stress of royal duties." The suggestion of seeing the palace physician only infuriated Catherine further. She stopped pacing and turned to face the Queen directly, her eyes blazing with anger and hurt. "You think I'm having a breakdown? That I'm some hysterical woman who can't handle the pressure? I think you're a person in distress who needs help," the Queen replied carefully. "Your behavior today is completely unlike you, Catherine. The woman who married my son was gracious, intelligent, and understood the importance of maintaining dignity in public." Catherine laughed harshly. That woman was naive and believed she could make a difference. That woman thought marrying Prince Alexander meant she could use her position to actually help people instead of being a glorified ribbon-cutting ornament. The Queen's expression softened slightly as she began to understand the root of Catherine's anger. The transition from private citizen to royal family member was never easy, and she remembered her own struggles when she had first married into the monarchy decades earlier. However, understanding didn't excuse the current behavior. Catherine, being part of this family means accepting certain responsibilities and limitations, Queen Isabella explained patiently. "The monarchy exists to serve the people, but we must do so within established frameworks that have proven successful for generations." "Successful?" Catherine's voice rose again.
"Successful at maintaining your power while children in our own kingdom go hungry?"
"Successful at preserving traditions that prevent real progress? Your frameworks are chains that keep us from doing anything meaningful." The Queen felt her own temper beginning to rise. She had dedicated her entire adult life to serving her people and modernizing the monarchy while respecting its traditions. Catherine's accusations struck at the very core of everything she believed about her role and responsibilities. "That is quite enough," Queen Isabella said firmly. "I will not stand here and listen to you dismiss 4 decades of service to this kingdom. If you're unhappy with your role here, perhaps you should consider whether this life is truly what you want." The implied threat hung in the air between them. Catherine understood perfectly that the Queen was suggesting she could leave the royal family if she found her position so unbearable. The prospect of losing her title, her status, and potentially her marriage to Prince Alexander hit her like a physical blow. "Are you threatening me?" Catherine asked, her voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "Are you actually suggesting I should abandon my husband and walk away from my responsibilities?" "I'm suggesting you need to decide whether you can fulfill your duties with the grace and dignity required of a royal family member," the Queen replied coldly. "Today's display suggests you may not be capable of that." Catherine's face went pale, then flushed bright red as the full impact of the Queen's words sank in. Everything she had worked for, Everything she had sacrificed to become part of this family was being questioned because she had dared to speak up about problems she saw in the system. "You want grace and dignity?" Catherine said, her voice trembling with rage. "Fine. Let me show you exactly what I think of your precious system." Before the Queen could react, Catherine swept her arm across the polished conference table, sending papers, teacups, and the ornate silver tea service crashing to the floor. The sound of breaking porcelain echoed through the chamber like gunshots, and the Queen stepped back in genuine shock. "Catherine," Queen Isabella gasped, staring at the destruction. Some of those tea pieces had been wedding gifts from foreign dignitaries, irreplaceable artifacts of diplomatic history now lying in ruins on the marble floor. But Catherine wasn't finished. Years of pent-up frustration and feeling powerless within the rigid royal structure had reached a breaking point. She grabbed the heavy crystal paperweight from the Queen's desk and hurled it against the wall, where it shattered into thousands of glittering pieces. Outside the chamber doors, Captain Sterling heard the sounds of destruction and made a split-second decision that would change everything. Palace security protocols were clear about protecting members of the royal family from any threat, even if that threat came from within the family itself. He signaled to his men, and they prepared to enter the chamber where their queen might be in danger from her own daughter-in-law. Fictional Royal Drama Story, Part 3. The heavy oak doors of the grand chamber burst open as Captain Marcus Sterling and 3 royal guards rushed into the room with military precision. Their polished boots crunched over broken porcelain and crystal as they quickly assessed the chaotic scene before them. Queen Isabella stood pressed against the far wall, her usually perfect composure shaken by the violent outburst she had just witnessed. Catherine remained in the center of the destruction, breathing heavily, her chest rising and falling rapidly as adrenaline coursed through her system. Her hands were trembling, and small cuts from flying crystal dotted her arms where she had been too close to the paperweight's impact. "Your Majesty, are you injured?" Captain Sterling asked urgently, his trained eyes scanning the Queen for any signs of harm while simultaneously keeping Catherine in his peripheral vision. "I'm unharmed, Captain," Queen Isabella replied, though her voice betrayed the shock she was experiencing. "But Lady Catherine appears to be having some sort of episode." Catherine whirled around to face the guards, her eyes wild with a mixture of rage, embarrassment, and growing panic as she realized what she had done. The reality of destroying priceless royal artifacts in front of the Queen was beginning to sink in, but her anger was still burning too hot for rational thought. "Get out," she screamed at the guards. "This is a private family matter. You have no right to be here." Captain Sterling had served the royal family for 15 years and had never encountered a situation quite like this. His training covered external threats, terrorist attacks, and foreign spies, but dealing with a member of the royal family who posed a potential danger to the Queen required delicate handling. "Lady Catherine," he said in his most diplomatic tone, "I need you to step away from Her Majesty and calm down. We're here to ensure everyone's safety." "Safety?" Catherine laughed hysterically. "You think I'm going to hurt her?" "I'm trying to save this kingdom from her outdated thinking." The Queen watched in horrified fascination as the woman she had welcomed into her family 5 years earlier transformed into someone completely unrecognizable. Catherine's usual elegant demeanor had been replaced by something raw and desperate that spoke to deep psychological wounds. "Catherine, please," Queen Isabella said gently, trying to reach whatever rational part of her daughter-in-law might still be listening. "Let's sit down and discuss this calmly. Captain Sterling, perhaps you and your men could wait outside." But Captain Sterling had noticed something that troubled him deeply. Catherine's behavior wasn't just angry or upset. It seemed genuinely unstable. Her movements were erratic, her speech patterns were becoming increasingly rapid and disjointed, and there was a quality to her eyes that suggested she might not be fully in control of her actions. "Your Majesty, with respect, I don't think that would be advisable," he said carefully. "Lady Catherine needs medical attention, and the situation needs to be contained before it escalates further." Catherine's head snapped toward the captain, her expression shifting from wild anger to calculating fury. "Contained? Medical attention? You're treating me like I'm some kind of criminal or mental patient. Ma'am, you've just destroyed royal property and created a potentially dangerous situation," Captain Sterling replied firmly but respectfully. "Standard protocol requires that we ensure the safety of all parties involved." The mention of protocol seemed to trigger something even deeper in Catherine's psyche. Everything about her life for the past 5 years had been governed by protocols, procedures, and endless rules that dictated every aspect of her existence from the moment she woke up until she went to sleep. Protocol! She shrieked, grabbing another crystal ornament from a nearby shelf. Everything is always about your precious protocols. Well, here's what I think of your protocols. She hurled the ornament toward the massive portrait of Queen Isabella's predecessor that hung above the fireplace. The crystal struck the painting's ornate golden frame with a loud crack, leaving a visible gouge in the centuries-old artwork. That was the final straw for Captain Sterling. His primary duty was to protect the Queen, and Catherine's behavior had crossed the line from family dispute to potential assault. He nodded to his men, and they began moving toward Catherine with practiced efficiency. Lady Catherine Blackwood, Captain Sterling announced formally, by the authority vested in me as head of royal security, I am placing you under protective custody for the safety of yourself and others. Please do not resist. The words hit Catherine like a thunderbolt. The full realization of what was happening crashed over her like a cold wave. She was being arrested. In the palace she had called home for 5 years, by guards she had chatted with countless times during boring state functions. She was being treated like a common criminal. You can't arrest me, she protested, backing away from the approaching guards. I'm a member of the royal family. I'm the future queen of this kingdom. Ma'am, this is for everyone's protection, one of the guards said gently as they formed a semicircle around her. Please cooperate and come with us quietly. Queen Isabella watched the scene unfold with a mixture of sadness and necessity. She had hoped it wouldn't come to this, but Catherine's behavior had left them with no choice. The monarchy's reputation, the safety of everyone in the palace, and Catherine's own well-being required immediate intervention. Catherine, the Queen said softly, please go with them. We'll sort this out, but right now you need help that I can't provide. For a moment, Catherine's facade cracked completely. Beneath the anger and defiance, Queen Isabella could see a broken woman who had been struggling with pressures and expectations that had finally overwhelmed her completely. But that moment of vulnerability passed quickly, replaced by renewed rage at the humiliation of being arrested in her own home. As the guards moved closer, Catherine made one final desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation, not knowing that her next actions would seal her fate and create a scandal that would rock the kingdom to its very foundations. Fictional royal drama story. Part 4A's The Royal Guards closed in around her. Catherine's last shreds of composure completely disintegrated. The woman who had once gracefully navigated state dinners and charity galas was now cornered like a wild animal, and her final desperate acts would ensure that this day would be remembered as one of the darkest in royal history. Don't you dare touch me, she screamed, grabbing the nearest object she could find, an antique silver letter opener from the Queen's desk. The blade gleamed in the afternoon sunlight as she brandished it toward the approaching guards. Captain Sterling immediately signaled for his men to halt. A weapon, even a small one, changed the entire dynamic of the situation. What had been a family dispute requiring gentle handling had now become a potential assault with a deadly weapon. Lady Catherine, put down the letter opener, he commanded, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he used in genuine crisis situations. You don't want to make this worse than it already is. Queen Isabella gasped and stepped further back against the wall. In 40 years of reign, she had faced many challenges, but she had never been threatened with a weapon by a member of her own family. The silver letter opener might seem insignificant, but in Catherine's unstable hands it represented a genuine danger. Worse? Catherine laughed wildly, waving the blade erratically. How could this possibly get worse? You're already treating me like a criminal. My own family is having me arrested in my own home. Catherine, please, Queen Isabella pleaded, her voice trembling slightly for the first time. Put down the letter opener and let's talk about this. Whatever problems we have, we can work them out without violence. But Catherine was beyond reasoning. The stress of royal life, the constant scrutiny, the endless protocols, and the feeling that her voice didn't matter had created a perfect storm of psychological pressure that had finally exploded. She was no longer thinking clearly or rationally. Talk? She shrieked. When have you ever wanted to talk? When have you ever listened to anything I've said? You made your decision about me years ago, that I was just some commoner who got lucky enough to marry your precious son. The accusation stung because it contained a grain of truth. Queen Isabella had initially been skeptical of Prince Alexander's choice to marry Catherine, a successful but common-born lawyer. While she had eventually accepted Catherine into the family, perhaps she had never fully embraced her as an equal. "That's not true, Catherine," the Queen said softly. "You've been a valued member of this family." "Valued?" Catherine's voice cracked with emotion. "I've been a decoration. A pretty face to stand next to Alexander at official functions. Every idea I've had, every initiative I've proposed, every attempt to make a real difference has been shot down by your committees and your advisors and your endless bureaucracy." Captain Sterling was growing increasingly concerned. Catherine's grip on the letter opener was unsteady, and her movements were becoming more erratic. He had seen enough combat situations to recognize when someone was at their absolute breaking point, and Catherine was teetering on the edge of complete psychological collapse. "Ma'am, I understand you're upset," he said carefully. "But threatening people with a weapon is a serious crime, even for members of the royal family. Please put it down before you do something you'll regret for the rest of your life." The mention of legal consequences seemed to penetrate Catherine's haze of rage for a moment. She looked around the destroyed chamber, at the broken crystal and porcelain scattered across the floor, at the damaged portrait hanging crooked on the wall, and at the Queen pressed against the far wall looking genuinely frightened. For a brief second, clarity returned to her eyes, and she seemed to realize the magnitude of what she had done. The letter opener trembled in her hand as the full weight of her actions began to settle on her shoulders like a crushing burden. "Oh my God," she whispered, staring at the weapon in her hand as if seeing it for the first time. "What have I done? What am I doing?" Queen Isabella saw the moment of lucidity and seized the opportunity to reach out to whatever remained of the woman she had once known. "Catherine, it's not too late to stop this. Put down the letter opener and let us help you." But the moment of clarity was brief. The pressure and stress that had built up over years couldn't be resolved with a few kind words. Catherine's psychological state was too fragile, and the humiliation of being arrested in front of the Queen rekindled her rage. "Help me," she snarled, raising the letter opener again. "The only help I need is to get away from this prison you call a palace. I should never have married into this family. I should never have given up my life for this nightmare." The guards tensed as Catherine became more agitated. Captain Sterling made a hand signal that prepared his men for immediate action. They couldn't allow the situation to continue escalating, especially with the Queen in potential danger. "Lady Catherine," Captain Sterling said firmly, "this is your final warning. Drop the weapon immediately or we will be forced to take it from you." Catherine looked around wildly, finally realizing that she was completely surrounded with no way out. The guards were positioned between her and every exit. The Queen was watching her with a mixture of fear and pity, and she was holding a weapon that made her look like a dangerous criminal rather than a member of the royal family. In that moment of desperation, Catherine made a decision that would have consequences far beyond anything she could imagine. Instead of surrendering the letter opener, she raised it high above her head and let out a primal scream of frustration and rage that echoed through the ancient halls of Grandview Palace. The guards had no choice but to act immediately, to protect their queen and prevent Catherine from hurting herself or others. What happened next would create a scandal that would dominate headlines around the world, and forever change the public perception of the Valorian royal family. Fictional royal drama story. Part 5. Captain Sterling and his men moved with the swift precision that years of training had ingrained in them. As Catherine raised the letter opener above her head, 2 guards lunged forward simultaneously, while the third positioned himself to protect Queen Isabella from any potential harm. The struggle was brief, but intense. Catherine fought against the guards with surprising strength, fueled by desperation and the adrenaline of her psychological breakdown. She swung the letter opener wildly, forcing the guards to be extremely careful to avoid injury while trying to disarm her without causing harm. "Let go of me," she screamed as Guard Lieutenant Thompson grabbed her wrist and applied pressure to force her to release the weapon. "You have no right. I'm going to be your queen someday." "Not today, ma'am," Lieutenant Thompson replied grimly as he successfully wrestled the letter opener from her grasp. The silver blade clattered across the marble floor, finally removing the immediate threat to everyone's safety. But even disarmed, Catherine continued to struggle violently against the guards holding her. She kicked, thrashed, and screamed obscenities that would have shocked the palace staff if they could have heard them. The elegant lady who had once charmed foreign ambassadors and presided over charity luncheons had completely disappeared, replaced by someone wild and unrecognizable. Queen Isabella watched in horror as her daughter-in-law was physically restrained by royal guards in the very chamber where centuries of peaceful, diplomatic meetings had taken place. The ancient tapestries and oil paintings seemed to bear witness to this unprecedented breach of royal decorum, with silent disapproval. "Catherine, please stop fighting them," the Queen pleaded, her voice thick with emotion. "You're only making this harder on yourself." Captain Sterling produced a set of restraints from his utility belt, standard equipment that he had never imagined using on a member of the royal family. The irony wasn't lost on him that he was about to arrest the woman who, under normal circumstances, would someday have the authority to command his absolute loyalty and obedience. "Lady Catherine Blackwood," he announced formally as the restraints clicked into place around her wrists. "You are under arrest for assault, destruction of royal property, and threatening a member of the royal family with a weapon. You have the right to remain silent, and anything you say may be used in evidence against you." The reading of her rights seemed to shock Catherine into a moment of stillness. The reality of her situation was finally penetrating through her rage and desperation. She was actually being arrested in handcuffs like a common criminal. The magnitude of what had just happened began to dawn on her. "This can't be happening," she whispered, staring down at the metal restraints around her wrists. "This has to be a nightmare. I'm going to wake up and none of this will be real." But it was very real, and the consequences were only beginning to unfold. Captain Sterling spoke quietly into his radio, coordinating with other security personnel throughout the palace. Word of Lady Catherine's arrest would need to be contained initially, but eventually, the news would have to be released to the public and the media. Queen Isabella approached slowly, her heart breaking as she looked at the woman who had been like a daughter to her for 5 years. Despite everything that had just happened, she still felt a deep sadness for Catherine's obvious psychological distress. "Catherine," she said gently, "we're going to get you the help you need. Dr. Richardson will examine you and will arrange for proper psychiatric care. This doesn't have to be the end of everything." Catherine looked up at the Queen with eyes that were now filled with tears rather than rage. The fight had gone out of her completely, leaving behind only exhaustion and the crushing realization of what she had done. "I've ruined everything, haven't I?" she asked in a small voice that was barely above a whisper. "Alexander will never forgive me. The kingdom will never forgive me. I've destroyed my entire life in one afternoon." The Queen didn't answer immediately because, truthfully, Catherine might be right. The royal family's reputation depended on maintaining dignity and stability, and today's events had shattered both completely. The political ramifications alone could destabilize the monarchy's relationship with Parliament and the people. "We'll take this one step at a time," Queen Isabella finally said diplomatically. "Right now, the most important thing is getting you the medical attention you clearly need." Captain Sterling completed his radio communications and turned back to address the Queen. "Your Majesty, we need to escort Lady Catherine to the palace medical facility for evaluation, and then to the secure holding area until we can determine the next steps. The idea of being taken to a holding area, essentially a jail cell in the palace basement, seemed to trigger one final wave of panic in Catherine. She began struggling against the restraints again, though with much less energy than before. "Please don't put me in a cell," she begged, looking desperately between the Queen and Captain Sterling. "I know I've done terrible things, but please don't lock me up like an animal. I'll do whatever you want, but please don't put me in a cage." Queen Isabella felt her heart breaking all over again. Despite the destruction and chaos Catherine had caused, she was still family, and seeing her reduced to begging was almost unbearable. "Captain Sterling," the Queen said carefully, "perhaps Lady Catherine could be held in one of the guest suites under guard rather than the holding cells? She clearly needs medical supervision more than imprisonment." Captain Sterling considered the request. From a security standpoint, it was irregular, but the Queen's suggestion made sense from both humanitarian and public relations perspectives. If word of Catherine's arrest leaked to the media, it would look better if she were being treated as a family member in crisis rather than a dangerous criminal. "That would be acceptable, Your Majesty," he agreed. "We can secure one of the medical wing suites and post guards outside. Dr. Richardson can conduct his evaluation there." As the guards prepared to escort Catherine from the grand chamber, she took one last look around at the destruction she had caused. Broken crystal and porcelain crunched under the guards' boots, and the damaged portrait seemed to stare down at her with disapproval. "I'm sorry," she whispered to the Queen as they led her toward the door. "I'm so sorry for everything." Queen Isabella watched them go, then slowly sank into her chair amid the ruins of what had been a peaceful morning. The real challenges were just beginning, and she would need all of her wisdom and experience to navigate the crisis that Catherine's breakdown had created for the entire royal family. Fictional Royal Drama Story, Part 6. The palace moved with the efficiency of a well-oiled machine in the hours following Catherine's arrest. Word spread quickly among the staff, though everyone understood the absolute necessity of maintaining complete secrecy until the royal family could determine how to handle the crisis. Dr. Marcus Richardson, the palace physician, arrived at the medical wing within minutes of receiving Captain Sterling's urgent summons. At 68 years old, he had served 3 generations of the royal family and had seen his share of crises, but nothing quite like this situation. Catherine sat on the edge of the bed in the secure medical suite, still wearing her wrinkled business attire from the morning's meeting. The restraints had been removed, but 2 guards remained stationed outside the door. She stared blankly at the wall, seemingly in shock from the events of the afternoon. "Lady Catherine," Dr. Richardson said gently as he entered the room with his medical bag, "I'm here to make sure you're not injured and to assess your current condition. May I examine you?" She looked up at him with eyes that seemed hollow and distant. "I'm not hurt physically, doctor, but I think something inside my mind has broken completely." Dr. Richardson had suspected as much. Catherine's behavior, as described by Captain Sterling, suggested a severe psychological episode, possibly a complete nervous breakdown brought on by prolonged stress and pressure. He began his examination with gentle professionalism. Meanwhile, in the Queen's private study, an emergency meeting was taking place that would determine Catherine's fate and the future of the monarchy itself. Queen Isabella sat behind her antique desk, flanked by her most trusted advisors. Lord Chancellor Winston, despite his earlier uncomfortable encounter with Catherine, spoke first. "Your Majesty, we need to consider the legal implications very carefully. Lady Catherine has committed serious crimes, but prosecuting a member of the royal family will create a constitutional crisis." Prime Minister James Hartwell, who had been summoned from Parliament, nodded gravely. "The political ramifications could be devastating. Opposition parties will use this to attack the monarchy's stability and judgment. We need to find a solution that protects both justice and the crown." Queen Isabella listened to her advisors debate various options, but her mind kept returning to the broken woman who had been led away in restraints. Whatever Catherine had done, she was still family, and the Queen felt a responsibility to protect her, while also protecting the institution of the monarchy. "What does Dr. Richardson's preliminary assessment indicate?" she asked. Royal Private Secretary Victoria Ashford consulted her notes from a recent phone call. "He believes Lady Catherine has suffered a complete psychological breakdown, possibly triggered by long-term stress and pressure. He's recommending immediate psychiatric hospitalization and evaluation. That could actually work in our favor," Prime Minister Hartwell observed. "If Lady Catherine is genuinely mentally ill, it provides grounds for avoiding criminal prosecution while getting her the help she needs." Lord Chancellor Winston frowned. "But we can't simply ignore what happened. She threatened Your Majesty with a weapon and destroyed priceless royal artifacts. There must be some form of accountability." Queen Isabella stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace gardens, where Catherine had once hosted children's charity events. Those happier memories seemed like they belonged to a different lifetime. "What about Prince Alexander?" she asked quietly. "Has anyone contacted my son?" Victoria Ashford shifted uncomfortably. "Prince Alexander is currently in Switzerland on a trade mission. We've sent word that he needs to return immediately for a family emergency, but we haven't provided details yet." The Queen nodded. Alexander would be devastated when he learned what had happened to his wife. Despite their occasional marital difficulties, he genuinely loved Catherine and had always supported her charitable work and advocacy efforts. Dr. Richardson's full report arrived an hour later, and it painted a picture of a woman who had been struggling with severe depression, anxiety, and feelings of powerlessness for months. The pressure of royal life, combined with what he suspected might be underlying bipolar disorder, had created the perfect conditions for a complete psychological collapse. His recommendation is immediate transfer to the Westbridge Private Hospital for comprehensive psychiatric evaluation and treatment, Victoria Ashford reported. He believes with proper care Lady Catherine could potentially recover, but it will take time. Queen Isabella made her decision. Arrange for Lady Catherine's immediate transfer to Westbridge under maximum security and privacy. We'll tell the staff that she's being treated for exhaustion and stress. No mention of the arrest or the incident in the Grand Chamber. And the legal charges, Lord Chancellor Winston pressed, will be held in abeyance pending her psychiatric evaluation, the Queen replied firmly. If she's genuinely mentally ill, prosecuting her would be both cruel and pointless. Our focus should be on getting her well. Prime Minister Hartwell looked troubled. Your Majesty, with respect, we can't keep this secret forever. The palace staff who witnessed various parts of today's events will eventually talk. The media will start asking questions when Lady Catherine disappears from public events. Queen Isabella had already considered this problem. We'll announce that Lady Catherine is taking a temporary leave of absence from royal duties for health reasons. It's not uncommon for royals to step back when they're dealing with personal issues. And if she recovers? Victoria Ashford asked carefully. What happens to her position in the family? That was the question that would determine everything. Could Catherine ever return to royal duties after what had happened? Could the public trust her again? Could the Queen herself ever feel completely safe around her daughter-in-law? We'll cross that bridge when we come to it, Queen Isabella said diplomatically. Right now our priority is Catherine's health and the stability of the monarchy. As evening fell over Grandview Palace, Catherine was quietly transferred to Westbridge Private Hospital in an unmarked vehicle. The public remained unaware that one of their future queens had suffered a complete breakdown and been arrested for threatening the current monarch. But secrets in royal circles rarely stayed buried forever, and the events of this day would eventually come to light in ways that none of the participants could predict. The careful plans being made in the Queen's study would soon prove inadequate to contain a scandal of this magnitude. The real test for the Valorian royal family was yet to come, as they would soon discover that some crises are too big to manage quietly behind palace walls. Fictional royal drama story. Part 7. 3 weeks after Catherine's breakdown and arrest, the carefully constructed wall of secrecy around the incident began to crumble in spectacular fashion. The first crack appeared when Thomas Morrison, a junior palace groundskeeper who had witnessed Catherine being escorted away in restraints, sold his story to the kingdom's largest tabloid newspaper. Queen Isabella was having her morning tea when Victoria Ashford burst into her private dining room with a tablet displaying the explosive headline, Royal Scandal, Future Queen Arrested After Palace Rampage. The story contained enough accurate details to be credible, while sensationalizing every aspect of Catherine's breakdown. How much do they know? The Queen asked calmly, though her hands trembled slightly as she set down her teacup. Too much, Victoria replied grimly. Morrison apparently saw more than we realized. He describes Catherine being led away in handcuffs, mentions the broken glass he helped clean up, and quotes other staff members who heard shouting from the Grand Chamber. Within hours, the story exploded across social media and international news outlets. Reporters gathered outside Westbridge Private Hospital and Grandview Palace, demanding answers about Lady Catherine's condition and the circumstances of her hospitalization. Prince Alexander had returned from Switzerland 2 weeks earlier and had been spending every day at his wife's bedside as she underwent intensive psychiatric treatment. The revelation that their private family crisis was now public knowledge hit him like a physical blow. They're making her sound like a dangerous criminal, he said angrily to his mother during an emergency meeting in the Queen's study. She's sick, not evil. She needs compassion, not this media circus. Queen Isabella understood her son's pain, but she also recognized that the monarchy was facing its most serious crisis in decades. Public opinion polls showed a dramatic drop in support for the royal family, with many citizens questioning whether Catherine should ever be allowed to return to public duties. Dr. Richardson's latest report on Catherine's condition offered some hope, but also raised new concerns. Lady Catherine is responding well to treatment for severe depression and anxiety, he had written. However, she's also been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, which explains the manic episode that led to her breakdown. With proper medication and therapy, she can live a normal life, but the stress of royal duties may not be advisable. The medical diagnosis created a new set of challenges for the royal family. If Catherine couldn't handle the pressures of royal life, what did that mean for her marriage to Prince Alexander and her position as future queen? Opposition politicians seized on the crisis to attack the monarchy's relevance in modern society. Parliament member Sarah Davies gave a particularly scathing interview to the BBC declaring, "This incident shows that the royal family is just as dysfunctional as any other family, but they're funded by taxpayer money and given special privileges they clearly don't deserve." Public protests began appearing outside the palace gates, with some demonstrators calling for Catherine's removal from the line of succession and others demanding the abolition of the monarchy altogether. The crisis that had begun as a private family matter was now threatening the very foundation of the Valorian constitutional system. Catherine herself remained largely unaware of the media storm surrounding her case. Her doctors had deemed it medically necessary to limit her exposure to news and social media during the early stages of her recovery. She spent her days in therapy sessions, slowly coming to terms with the magnitude of her breakdown and the consequences of her actions. During one particularly difficult session with Dr. Sarah Mitchell, her psychiatrist at Westbridge, Catherine finally confronted the full reality of what she had done. "I threatened the Queen with a weapon," she said quietly, tears streaming down her face. "I destroyed priceless artifacts and embarrassed my family in front of the world. How can anyone ever forgive me for that?" Dr. Mitchell had been treating Catherine for 2 weeks and had seen remarkable progress in her mental state. The combination of mood stabilizers and intensive therapy was helping her regain emotional equilibrium. But the psychological work of rebuilding her life would take much longer. "Catherine, you were experiencing a severe manic episode brought on by untreated bipolar disorder," Dr. Mitchell explained patiently. "You weren't in control of your actions. That doesn't excuse what happened, but it does explain it." "Will I ever be able to go back to my old life?" Catherine asked desperately. "Can I ever be trusted with royal duties again?" It was a question that Dr. Mitchell couldn't answer, because it involved political and family decisions that went far beyond medical considerations. What she could say was that Catherine's mental health was improving dramatically, and that with proper treatment, she could lead a fulfilling life outside the public spotlight. Meanwhile, Queen Isabella was making the most difficult decision of her long reign. After consulting with Prime Minister Hartwell, the Archbishop of Valoria, and her closest advisors, she concluded that the monarchy's survival required decisive action. Prince Alexander was summoned to a private meeting with his mother in the same grand chamber where Catherine's breakdown had occurred. The room had been fully restored, with new crystal and porcelain replacing what had been destroyed. But the psychological scars remained. "Alexander," the Queen began carefully, "I need you to understand that whatever decision we make about Catherine's future must prioritize the stability of the crown and the welfare of our people." Prince Alexander knew what was coming, and his face grew pale as he prepared to hear words that would change his life forever. The medical evidence suggests that Catherine cannot handle the pressures of royal life without risking another breakdown. Queen Isabella continued, "The public has lost confidence in her ability to serve as future queen. For the good of everyone involved, including Catherine herself, I believe she should renounce her royal titles and step back from public life permanently." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. Alexander felt his world crashing down around him as he realized that his mother was essentially asking him to choose between his wife and his duty to the crown. "And if I refuse?" he asked quietly. Queen Isabella's expression was filled with sorrow but also resolve. "Then you would need to consider whether you're prepared to renounce your own claim to the throne." As the sun set over Grandview Palace on that fateful day, the Valorian royal family faced an uncertain future. Catherine's breakdown had exposed the fragility of an ancient institution in the modern world, and the decisions made in the coming days would determine whether the monarchy could survive its greatest crisis in generations. The woman who had once dreamed of using her royal position to help children and change the world lay sedated in a hospital bed, unaware that her mental illness had inadvertently sparked a constitutional crisis that would reshape the kingdom forever.